was a moment of hope for the entire region, proof that corruption and impunity were not inevitable. We're taking you back to 2015 to Guatemala with the forced resignation of the president, Otto Perez Molina, finally swallowed up by the justice system. Well, let's hear first of all from some demonstrators celebrating their victory after weeks of protests.
We're moved, very happy to see the way people mobilise paid off, because it's pressure from the general public that forced him to resign.
The president's resignation is proof of the strength and the unity of the people of Guatemala. We've had enough of corruption in our government.
Well, Perez Molina, the prize catch of the Cicig, the International Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala. It was set up in 2007 to investigate crime and corruption at the highest levels of government in a country ravaged by almost 40 years of civil war. But the victory for justice was short-lived. In 2018, Cicig dissolved by the new president, Jimmy Morales, whom it had been investigating. Well, since then, the entire justice system in the government's crosshairs. Magistrates have been arrested, imprisoned or forced into exile. Journalists and lawyers suffering the same fate. The hope, born in 2015, receding further each day. All as the country itself is being plunged back into authoritarianism. Laurence, Cuvillier and Matthieu Comin revisit Guatemala for France 24.
Entendida la colocación como la recepción física a ese cash. Dinero sucio, pues, que obtuvo sin justificación legal alguna.
A flood of accusations, but Ruben Zamora keeps his cool. He's the most famous journalist in Guatemala, the president of the investigative newspaper he himself founded almost 30 years ago. Since July 2022, he's been in jail, accused of receiving a donation of 37,000 euros in cash from a businessman via his newspaper.
Esa transacción original, dolosa y maliciosa, pretendiéndole dar una apariencia de legalidad.
The prosecution aimed for the jugular, demanding a 40-year jail sentence.
I was laughing because I'm 67 and it's the first time I've ever been in the dock. This will be my first ever conviction and look how they're treating me. Recently, a politician laundered 35 billion quetzals. He remains untouched, but me, for 300,000 quetzal, they want to give me 40 years in jail. So, yes, made me laugh.
9 successive lawyers came to Ruben's defense, but one after the other they gave up, coming under pressure or intimidation from the court. 4 of them even ended up in jail.
You can't just lie down and take it. You have to fight. I may be even freer in my cell than outside.
Stay strong, Jose Ruben. We're on your side.
His supporters are timid, the courtroom almost empty. But Evelyn Blank, a journalist and friend of Ruben, expected as much.
Ruben Zamora does have some public support, but everyone is afraid of the people who are attacking him. They're very powerful people at the heart of the state and are using the judicial institutions for their own ends.
The person who has Ruben in his sights is this man, Ricardo Mendes, president of the Foundation Against Terrorism. For them, terrorists means former guerrilla fighters in Guatemala's civil war, but also the journalists, judges and lawyers whose investigations touch upon former soldiers in the conflict, many of whom are still highly influential in Guatemalan politics. The foundation has been quick to lash out at members of the Cicig, a unique entity established in cooperation with the United Nations. Its mission was to help Guatemala's justice system investigate embezzlement, fraud and extrajudicial killings. From 2006 to 2018, a team of foreign and local experts combed through cases, busting criminal networks and bringing high-ranking politicians to court. Flor was part of it. She had to flee the country a year ago and now lives in exile.
I hope I can come back someday and fight for Guatemala. I love my country, and I love all my old colleagues who stayed there and who are innocent.
Today, 4 of them are in prison. 32 others are being prosecuted or also in exile.
We have been threatened many times.
On social media, the Foundation Against Terrorism has openly accused Flor several times and threatened to remove all civil rights from former members of the Cicig or the Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office.
They are killing us, not physically, but they're trying to annihilate us by reducing us to silence, by scaring us.
At one time, the Cicig seemed to have a bright future. In 2011, the then Secretary-General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, paid a visit. There was talk of extending it to other countries to combat corruption elsewhere in the continent.
The Cicig was like an experiment for the United Nations, but even they didn't think it would have such a big impact. They didn't think we'd be able to dismantle so many criminal organizations.
In 2015, the Cicig caused a political earthquake. It brought down the sitting Guatemalan president and vice president for fraud and criminal conspiracy. Celebrations spread across the whole country. As a member of the Cicig, Flor couldn't join the revelers in the streets.
But we watched it all on TV. It was so emotional. We really felt there was hope.
Back in Guatemala City, Ricardo Mendes, the man who today is taking journalists and Cicig members to court, tells us he too was in the streets in 2015.
We all felt this sense of hope in the fight against corruption. We converged on Constitution Square that day. For the first time, Guatemala was united. But the week after, I started to see things I didn't like red flags with the hammer and sickle. And I thought to myself, no, I'm not okay with this. I'm not going to go along with this manipulation.
The shadow of communism, a bogeyman left over from the continent's longest armed conflict. 36 years of civil war from 1960 to 96 had pitched the army against Marxist-inspired guerrillas. Ricardo's father was a high-ranking military officer at a time when several massacres were committed against the Maya communities, something Ricardo seeks to play down today.
You know, there's no war without abuses. Our prisons are full of soldiers who were put through unfair trials. And well, now we're going to fill the jails with guerrilla fighters. We'll take care of this ourselves.
Former guerrilla fighters or members of the Cicig, Ricardo tells us both are part of the same socialist communist plot. He labels himself as ultra-right-wing. Do you think it's fair that so many Cicig members are in prison today?
There aren't enough. There should be more of them in jail. There have to be more.
In the meantime, he can already claim credit for killing off Ruben Zamora's newspaper, El Periodico.
These are all of our hardcover editions.
Oscar was the newspaper's manager, but on May 15th, 2023, El Periodico announced it was shutting down for good. He's now busy emptying the premises and selling whatever he can.
And you see, corruption was a huge topic.
From its founding in 1996, El Periodico built a reputation for the country's best investigative reporting. Its journalists also uncovered crimes committed during the Civil War.
We made ends meet however we could, month after month. But when Ruben was arrested, it was a death blow for us. We fought until the bitter end. This was the very last edition of the paper. It was emotional to see the machine in action, to see the newspapers coming off the press, the rolls of paper spinning so fast. It's in perfect condition. You just need to switch it back on. To see it sent off to be broken up for scrap, it breaks my heart. For so many years, this machine printed one of the most combative newspapers ever.
On the entrance wall, the most memorable front pages of 2015.
That was one of the demonstrations in Constitution Square where everyone gathered together. Everyone was in the street. It was a party atmosphere.
But it wasn't to last. In 2018, the sitting president, Jimmy Morales, declared the Cicig non grata. At the time, the commission was investigating him. Foreign members of the commission had to urgently leave the country. And yet, 2015 is remembered as a democratic breakthrough, a sign of hope for all Latin America. Back then, Maynor was a student leader.
There were maybe 35,000 of us in this square. I would never have dreamed that was possible. Before, when we managed to get 1,000 people together for a protest, we thought it was a big success. And this was when we realized that something much bigger and totally unexpected was going on in our country.
But not long after the euphoria, divisions reappeared.
Afterwards, we as organizers of the protests, we started to be attacked by people who wanted to protect their own impunity. They started to make people believe that the protests were all just plots by leftists, communists, terrorists, and they stoked up old fears. Now they're taking revenge on us. It's a huge leap backwards.
Nowadays, protests are rare, with few in attendance.
You'd think that democracy had gone out of fashion.
The presidential election campaign is in full swing. Left-wing candidate Thelma Cabrera from the Mam ethnic group has been sidelined over an administrative quibble.
They've hijacked the Electoral Court and the Supreme Court. They are afraid of the people. They weren't afraid of me, Thelma, but of the people. They violated our rights, the rights to elect and to be elected.
She is one of the few Guatemalans who will publicly criticize the prosecutions of former Cicig members.
We congratulate the judges, the former prosecutors who did their work. It wasn't to the liking of the elites. I want to express my solidarity with all those who are now in exile, because they called out the cases of corruption and they paid a high price for it by having to flee their own country.
Mayacat, informando desde los territorios.
There are some pockets of resistance.
Con periodistas ubicados en las comunidades.
Los 6 comunitarios fueron criminalizados desde noviembre de 2017 a raíz de una manifestación donde comunidades afectadas por el desvío y contaminación de los ríos por parte de ingenios azucareros expresaban sus malestares contra...
Yamanik is a journalist at Radio Mayacat, giving a voice to Guatemala's indigenous peoples.
After 2015, several collectives got together in the rural regions because the same indignation was felt even in the most far-flung places.
Guatemala has a population of just over 17 million, speaking more than 20 native languages.
There's Tutahil, Kaqchikel, Quiche, Xinca, Garifuna, Mam, Kaqchi.
All living languages, spoken by almost half the population. These indigenous communities are vastly underrepresented in politics. They're inexistent in the economic elites and tend to see the events of 2015 as a missed opportunity.
When you talk about indigenous peoples, lots of people here associate us with disorder, dirtiness, alcohol problems. So they think they should come here, these saviors, to sort things out, clean up. In other words, to domesticate these peoples.
Today, Yamanik is visiting Alex, a Tzutujil weaver and sociologist. Santiago Atitlan is the only village in Guatemala where soldiers are formally forbidden after a massacre at the end of the Civil War.
This is where the army committed its last massacre in the village.
On December 2nd, 1990, 13 villagers were murdered.
The soldiers were drunk. They came and fired at our brothers and sisters in the crowd. They brought us the worst illness we've ever suffered, fear. And that's why today we're still living with the scars of militarization.
There are no soldiers in these streets, and yet, out of the 10 candidates for the municipal elections, 9 are from the hard right.
The soldiers are no longer dressed in fatigues. They're wearing suits, ties, nice hats. This is the new militarization that we're subjected to in our Tutu Hill community.
Alex is one of the few young men in the village to still wear traditional Tsutujil dress. From his weaving workshop, he hopes to breathe new life into indigenous cultures.
Thanks to art, thanks to our clothes and our fabrics, we can shake the system, a system which has oppressed us and created inequalities between us.
Guatemala is still fighting its old demons. With hindsight, the national unity of 2015 looks to have been no more than a bitter illusion. Ruben Zamora was eventually sentenced to 6 years in prison. Increasing evidence of a slide towards authoritarianism means those hoping for a new democratic awakening are left watching their dream fade day by day.